Tell us also about the estimates in terms of insurance costs that are used in this report that you've focused on yourself.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found was interesting, and I've done a lot of work on disasters and projecting future disasters, including in Australia. And what people should understand is that the biggest driver of the costs of disaster, I'm not talking about weather, I'm talking about the cost of disaster, are more people, more property, and more wealth in locations exposed to extreme events like bushfires and cyclones. And I noted, I was just in Australia recently, that when the report came out, the headlines said, $40 billion by 2050 due to climate change. And if you actually go into the report and track that number down, it's referenced to the 2024 Colvin report. And if you look that up and you go to the $40 billion, you see it says this does not include any of the effects of climate change. So this is one of those games of telephone or Chinese whispers where a number takes on a life of itself and shows up on headlines across the country, and it's not based on the actual science.
And there are also graphs that show the normalised cost of insurance from disasters in Australia. What does that tell us?
So normalized costs, so because disaster costs increase as there's more people, there's more property, we adapt. After Cyclone Tracy came through in 1974, there were improved building standards applied. So you can't just look at the rising costs to understand what's going on. You have to adjust them, and that's a process called normalization. And we helped introduce that into the literature a long time ago, more than 25 years ago. And a group in Australia called Risk Frontiers for Australian Insurance Group adjusts historical losses for societal change. And once you do that, there's no trend overall. It doesn't mean climate change isn't real or it's not serious. It just means we can't see it in that time series of loss data.
Now, as you say, you've got to take this stuff seriously. You've got to look at climate trends, and you've got to have rational risk assessments. And what struck me about this report was it looked at all the downside from a warming globe, warming temperatures, but there are no benefits. So we just know that's not true. For instance, if there are to be more deaths from heat, we know they're going to be more than made up for from fewer deaths from severe cold, which kills more people even in Australia, let alone around the rest of the world. You've got to be upfront and honest about this stuff, don't you, rather than just try and scare people with only the bad news.
Yeah, so this is what's really important about government climate assessments. And I've often said, I say this in the U.S., if climate assessments didn't exist, we'd have to invent them, because there's so much literature, there's so much contradictory claims, and for climate assessments to be taken seriously, they have to play things straight. And even beyond not referencing the full picture of good news and bad news, one of the things I found remarkable was that the Australian government released a parallel report on the technologies and costs associated with being on track to get net zero. And in contrast to the risk assessment, the cost report used a very aggressive, optimistic scenario for emissions, where in fact they will peak and go down. And that made the costs look much lower than they would had they used the exact same scenario they used in the risk assessment. And for me, that was just a bit too clever. And it's the sort of thing that degrades public trust, or at least risks degrading public trust in government science assessments.
Yeah, it's so spot on and so typical. They exaggerate the costs of climate change and climate change adaptation, and they minimise the costs of their own renewable energy strategy. It is so common, and you've crashed through it. Really appreciate your insight, Roger. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Justin.